Wonderful. So hello, everybody. Good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you are in the country. And thank you for joining us for Why You Do What You Do, a webinar on mindfulness and motivation with Brendan Cournane. I'm Nicole Young, the marketing coordinator for Private Vista, and I'll be your host for today. Before we get started, I just wanted to share a little bit about my firm, Private Vista. Private Vista is a financial planning and wealth management firm in the Chicagoland area. We manage approximately $2 billion in assets for our clients, and we have offices in both downtown Chicago and Oak Brook. We specialize in business executives, business owners, retirees, families, qualified plans, and women in transition. Enough about Private Vista. I'm just going to give you guys 2 short tips on the webinar just to ensure that you're able to have the best experience possible. First, you're going to notice that you'll be muted for the duration of the presentation. This is just to ensure that everyone can hear our presentation clearly. Second, we will have time for some Q&A at the end of this presentation. And due to financial compliance regulations, we're not able to utilize the chat or Q&A function, unfortunately. So in lieu of these features, we ask that you either A, send your questions to info@myprivatevista.com, or B, utilize that raise hand function that you'll find at the bottom of your Zoom window. So just kind of wiggle your mouse around on the screen and you'll see a bar pop up at the bottom, and there's raise hand. Click on that. That'll let us know that you have a question. I'll be able to unmute you and we can all chat and answer your questions. But that will be at the end of the webinar. So that is all I have for you. And I'd like to now throw things over to our presenter, Brendan Cournane. Thank you so much for joining us. Brendan, would you mind maybe sharing a little bit about you, about yourself, your story, and just so everyone can get to know you a little bit?
Thank you very much, Nicole. It's really a pleasure and an honor to be here with you today and with all of the Private Vista clients. By way of background, I practiced law for over 40 years. I was a public finance lawyer. I've been a partner in national law firms, as well as served in the public sector, including a stint as the general counsel for a state agency. Some people would describe my career path as being evidence of being a type A personality. And I think to support that, not only in the legal world, but my older 3 children were born when I was in law school. So I completed law school having a child born first, second, and third year of law school. As I evolved into mindfulness and exercise practice, I continued some of the personality traits by becoming a marathon runner. And I've run over 100 marathons around the world. So that tells you a little bit about the mindset I came from. And I lived a lot of that time with unhealthy life habits. And because of that, I had 10 years of bad habits, changed those in the late 80s, early 90s, and embarked on a mindfulness and exercise practice. And I realized that I shifted my thought process from more is never enough to a thought process that less is more. I realized I'm not alone in my journey, and I adapted my learned skills to becoming a professional development coach, which I practice now. I help people understand why they do what they do and how to maximize their time and energy to live their life to their fullest. Now, I may from time to time refer to information on my website, which you can see by my name on the screen is coachbrendan.com. So that's, if you want some supplemental information, you can find it there for me. So with that brief background, Nicole, how would you like to kick off the event with a poll for our guests?
Sure thing. So everybody that is on this event, just so you know, we're going to be launching some polls throughout this event just to get a gauge on where you're starting, what you're thinking. So do be ready for that when I just let everyone know that I'm about to launch a poll. So I'm about to launch a poll, everybody. Please take a moment to take a look at your screen and answer our question. It's about resolutions. And our question is, in past years, have you made a resolution? And how long did you stick with it if you did make a resolution? We just want to kind of get a gauge on where we're starting and who it is that we're presenting to. So I'll just give you guys about 30 seconds, and then I'll share those results with everyone here, as well as Brendan. We have a everyone's answering pretty similarly, it seems. Oh, no, numbers are going crazy now. Okay, it looks like actually everyone has participated. So I'll go ahead and end that poll and share the results. It looks like our #1 answer was, I've had a resolution and I got diverted. So what do you think of that, Brendan?
I think that's pretty common. There's a term that I use called life gets lifey. And oftentimes we have the best of intentions when we start off making a New Year's resolution. But the good thing is that even though we think about New Year's resolutions as happening on New Year's Day, we can reaffirm, we can readjust those resolutions at any time. It's not just the first couple of days of the year, but anytime throughout the year. So if we get diverted, if we get distracted, it doesn't mean we have to junk the entire thing. We can just start over by examining ourselves in a certain way and finding out why it is that we chose that resolution. For example, when people find that they've been distracted, I go back to them and ask, how did you select your resolution? And how do you know if you've been successful? And what kind of a timeline do you put on your resolution? Because oftentimes we may have a resolution like, I want to stop smoking. Well, that can be very easily done within the next day. You can stop smoking, and it then depends on how long will you stop smoking. Other ones, for example, like, I want to run a marathon this year. If you haven't been exercising, it's very unlikely that you're going to go out on January 2nd and run a marathon. You need a timeline to prepare yourself along the way. And if you get distracted along the way, you can restart your training program. And if you're successful along the way, in what time do you pause to say, I'm successful, I'm savoring this moment before I go on to the next level of my resolution? So Nicole, we learned a little bit about our guests with this poll. Let's get the event started in a different way. Where would you like to begin at this point?
Well, I think it's actually really funny that our guests answered our poll in this way, because we did want to talk about resolutions and how to stick to them. So I think since our guests answered our question that way, maybe we just start with talking about folks and their relationships. Start talking about folks' relationships to resolutions and how people select them and generally stick to them.
Mm-hmm. Great, and that's a great transition, because oftentimes many of the people that I work with think that they are what they do. They are lawyers, they are doctors, they're accountants. They need a tangible thing that they can identify with. However, in the course of my mindfulness practice, when I work with my clients, I remind them that really each one of us is a human being, not a human doing. So sometimes we need to pause from where we are and not identify necessarily with the accomplishment, but really look more deeper inside of ourselves by saying, why is this important to me? Now, to put that in the context of a New Year's resolution, and I may just refer to resolutions instead of New Year's because we're already past the first of the year. Some may have already been distracted from the resolution, and others may not be sure if they're really going to be committed to that. So how do you select your resolution? Quite often, it's so-so, the same old, same old. This year is the same resolution that I made in 2021, 2020, maybe even 2000. And for some reason or another, it comes up again on an annual basis. Many times it's because it's the popular resolution. And again, one is the smoking example that I gave. Over the course of years, people look on smoking differently than they did 50 years ago. But other things that are more popular now are things like the Peloton movement. And everybody else is doing it. I want to ride 1,000 miles on my Peloton in 2022, just as an example. So it may be the same old resolution. It may be something that is popular. But instead, if you're really trying to stick with the resolution and see, why is it meaningful to me? Is my resolution something that's important to me? And do I have a realistic plan to achieve my resolution? Both in the steps it takes to complete the resolution and the time that I'm giving myself to complete the resolution. Going back to the two examples I gave before, I can stop smoking tomorrow, and I know that by the end of the day tomorrow, I've been successful with my resolution, that I've made it through an entire day. If I want to run a marathon this year, I'm not in the position to run a marathon tomorrow. I need to train. I need to build my body up with some endurance things. So we can often get diverted in one of two ways. We can get diverted because we're not fully committed to what the resolution, or it's something that may not be meaningful to me. And we can also get diverted from the resolution because we're not giving ourselves enough grace, enough leeway to allow ourselves the time to achieve the goal. And we get frustrated. And when we get frustrated, it can kind of turn into a downward spiral that can cause us to move in a different direction.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I'm really guilty of selecting my resolutions in a lot of these ways. I mean, I've set resolutions based on based on what other people are doing. Someone says, I'm going to run a marathon. So I say, okay, I'll train for that with you too. Or
Sounds like a good
my
idea at the
resolution,
time, doesn't
I know, right?
it?
On day one, on January 1, it always sounds like a good idea. But I know my resolution this year, last year, and the previous year was I always want to have a trip plan. I always want to have something to look forward to. It's not a crazy resolution, but I currently don't even have a trip. So I'm already failing at my goal. And based on what you're saying, I probably don't achieve this goal very often because I don't really have a plan. But say I didn't choose that resolution that I currently have, and maybe I choose something that's more targeted. How do I know if my resolution has been successful and has been achieved?
I really like the example that you brought up, for example, of planning a trip and traveling someplace exotic, however you just define exotic.
Yeah.
And here it is, the 13th of January, and you haven't gone anywhere. So why not? Are you a failure? Of course you're not a failure. This is one of the ideas of keeping a progression as far as the timeline. When people think about the failure of their New Year's resolutions, it often comes down to trying to stuff 10 pounds of potato into a 5-pound bag. There's just too much stuff there for us to fit into the bag. So think about the notion of progress, not perfection. The perfect idea might be that you're going to X location for a 10-day period. But before you do that, the progress along the way, the timeline would be to maybe write down 5 to 10 different destinations that you might like to attend.
Yeah.
What time of year would you like to do them? As you narrow it down, is it practical for me to go to X place at this time of the year for 10 days? Or what I need to do it for 5 days? How much time do I have available? So each one of these progressive techniques makes you feel a sense of accomplishment, gives you a sense of accomplishment. By setting these incremental guidelines, these incremental milestones, there's a sense of accomplishment rather than the fact that, oh my God, it's January 13th and I haven't gone to Tahiti yet. I have an idea that Tahiti is one of my 5 ideas or my 10 places, and I can narrow it down so that maybe by February 1st, I know that I want to travel there in October. By March 1st, I contact travel agencies. So you start to work down the list. And there's another interesting component here. There's a psychological component that I work with a lot of my clients. And it's known as the stopping wish. And this is a psychological phenomenon that on a subconscious level, when we're about 75% of the way through our goal, 75, 80% of the way through our goal, our mind on a subconscious level tells us, you've done enough. It's time to stop. Hence the stopping wish. Now, one way that I work with my clients, both in the legal professional development world and in the running world, is how can we get that stopping wish to appear at a time when it's much more manageable? For example, in this case, if you try and plan a trip, if my goal is to list 10 things, 10 places to go, then that's achievable. When you're about 8 of the way through those lists, your mind could be saying, well, if this is my only goal, then at 8 points, it's time to stop and I've done enough on the list. But you're doing it at a time when your body and your mind is fresh. So you can say, I can pull through this. I can go on to the next step. So that incremental progress overcomes the stopping wish in a way that keeps you on track, but it also is a check-in to make sure that you are successful. And within the timeline of achieving your goal, it's both measurable and achievable.
Yeah, absolutely. Incremental milestones, I think, is really important that you're talking about now because, like I just said, I already called myself a failure, and it's only because I just haven't booked something. So I think, yeah, setting those milestones is really important to kind of give yourself that satisfaction of, okay, I've achieved something. It's not the end goal, but I'm getting there. Which is certainly important, I guess, to the mentality of the stopping wish, which I've never heard of. That's really interesting. So good to think about as I do start to try to achieve some goals. It's, don't stop when you're 75% the way there.
And it takes practice. It takes practice to both recognize what's going on. And I think if, for most people, oftentimes when I'm working with my clients, we look back on a task that they thought was insurmountable or very difficult. And I work with them too, and thinking about these incremental milestones along the way. I have a phrase that I use of being on the I team: impossible, improbable, inevitable. And when we're starting a challenging goal, whether it's New Year's resolution or a big project at work or a home renovation or something, when you're setting the goal, it may seem impossible. The old adage that you've got to reach for something that's slightly outside of your grasp in order to give you some motivation. But when you're starting, like perhaps running a marathon or achieving a big goal this year, on day one, it may seem impossible. But if you stick to the plan and you look at your incremental milestones, when you're about halfway through, that there's a mind shift, there's a paradigm shift that, well, maybe it's not impossible, maybe it's only improbable. And if you keep going and follow the plans and techniques, you'll find that improbable becomes inevitable success by the end. Even if you have to adjust your timeline, it can still become inevitable success by sticking with the program and trusting the process.
Yeah, and I think that's a great leeway into what I want to talk about next, which is mindfulness, because I think a lot of motivation does have to do with your mental state and how you're thinking about it. So we set up this webinar where we did want to talk about motivation and mindfulness and the connection between those two things. But I think a question that a lot of people asked, and I know I asked you this when we started talking, is what is mindfulness?
An easy, workable definition of mindfulness that I try to follow is paying attention to what's happening now without dichotomous judgment. I can sit here and say, what am I feeling and why? And I can say, in the context of a resolution, I'm 13 days into my resolution period, and I haven't achieved it yet. I should be in a different spot. I should have had that list of 10 destinations written down. I should have called the travel agencies. I should have done this or that. But yet, that judgment can be either negative judgment or positive judgment, but it's a way of putting us in a position of what we should be doing, not where we are. It goes back to the statement I made earlier that we're human beings, not human doings. When we think about mindfulness, it's paying attention, a sensory perception. When I work with lawyers or runners or any other type of professional, I want you to be sensual about your profession. By that, I mean, and this goes back to mindfulness, what do you see? What do you hear? What do you smell? What do you taste? What do you touch? And not saying that, it's a bad odor or it's a good odor, but just I'm aware of what's going on. So mindfulness is paying attention on purpose in the present moment without judgment. And the key element to that is not shooting yourself and not judging good, bad, or indifferent, just recognizing what's happening around you. So I think that's a basic summary of what it is. I've written a couple of articles on eco-mindfulness, which you can find on my website, which talks about getting out into nature in a way that for mindfulness, we can take a walk through Lincoln Park here in Chicago, or along, if anybody's on the East Coast, on the ocean front, walking along a beach, getting out into nature. If you're not in either of those locations, even walking around the block, paying attention to the trees, to the ground, and even this time of year in the wintertime, how is the ground different than it is in the middle of the summertime? If you live in a place like Arizona, what's the landscaping like compared to where you grew up? What is the ground telling me? What do I notice about that? And how does that impact where I am today and what I feel? How can I shift my mindset? Do I need to shift my mindset? In a lot of times in mindfulness, I think of it as a GPS system. And, we've all got on our smartphones now, we want to go someplace, so we plug in our destination. But when you're working with the GPS system, you not only have to plug in your destination, but you have to realize where you're starting from. If I want to get to New Orleans, it's a different route, whether I'm in Oakland, California, or New York City. The destination is still the same thing, but my GPS has to have a different set of coordinates to get me there. And that's kind of like what mindfulness is, thinking about where am I now? What's going on with me in the present moment?
I definitely understand what you're saying here, but I do want to just take one step back and kind of maybe speak for our audience. I don't have to be speaking for the audience, definitely for myself. And I'm just going to ask you maybe what happens if I try to attempt this mindfulness, this really focused thought and awareness on my surroundings. What if I try this and just kind of get bored? What if my mind wanders and I just kind of start multitasking no matter what? What if I'm just not able to really find myself practicing mindfulness too well?
I wish I had a nickel for every time I've heard somebody say that same thing. Heck, I wish I had a nickel for every time I was in that same situation and I either was multitasking or started thinking, where's my mind going now? I was just thinking about my trip and planning my trip. And now I'm off riding my Peloton or thinking about my lunch break. That's pretty common. So first of all, recognize that it is a common thing. I've been practicing mindfulness techniques for well over 30 years. I still am susceptible to getting distracted along the way. Many of the clients with which I'm working think that if I'm not fully focused and aware of what's going on, then I'm a failure. That gets back to that dichotomous thinking. So first of all, cut yourself a break. Recognize that that what you're doing when you get distracted in this way is normal. Now, how do you bring that back? How do you get the distraction? First, it's recognizing that you are distracted. Because oftentimes we think we are multitaskers and that we perform very, very well when we're multitasking. I'm certainly guilty of that. And many of the professionals that I deal with are also guilty of that. But actually, multitasking is a myth. When we're multitasking, shifting from one thing to another, we're never giving our full attention to any of those topics, to any of those tasks. And as a result, it's less than optimal performance. And in the mindfulness world and trying to work out and bring out the best from a mindfulness standpoint, it's trying to stay focused. And one of the best ways to do that is just thinking about your breath. And if you find that you're flitting about in different things, you can do this in just a matter of a couple of minutes, where you can sit in your chair in your office and either close your eyes or focus your gaze on something that's 15, 20 feet away and slightly downward. And just think about your breath. There's a technique called box breathing, where you inhale for a count of 4, hold your breath for a count of 4, exhale for a count of 4, and then pause for a count of 4. And pay attention to what your chest is doing. You can feel your chest rise and fall as you're breathing. And that directs the focus to something that's tangible, that's sensual. You can feel that. And then you can determine, now that I've got my focus back, which one of these 5 multitasking things am I going to concentrate on in order to complete it? So it's also a way of decluttering the mind. I notice a lot of times when I'm out for a run that problems that were mind-boggling 20 minutes before solve themselves because I'm not thinking about them. I'm thinking about my run on the lakefront. And the same thing is true whether I'm doing a breathing technique or just a reading. And sometimes decluttering the mind can easily be done just by walking around your office, your apartment, or outside. The act of movement is a very good way to bring back into mindfulness and divert the attention from all of the distractions along the way to kind of focus on one thing at a time.
And I think there's also just a side note. There's a lot of really great technology out there these days, because when you were talking about the kind of just breathing and focusing your breath, I know my Apple Watch reminds me to take a minute or 2 every day or 2 times a day to just breathe. So I guess the practice of mindfulness is even reaching Apple, and that's pretty cool. So I mean, there's a lot of ways we can remind ourselves to just kind of take a step back and breathe a little,
Yeah,
especially with these extra gadgets.
and it doesn't take a lot of time. You're right. Fitbits,
Right.
um, Apple Watches, Garmin watches, all have different things. There are apps like Calm and Headspace, to name just two, which give subtle meditations that you can listen to in a calming way. But it's also really kind of focusing on what you really want to accomplish. And when you get frenetic, realizing that the more frenetic I am, the less I'm going to get accomplished. That sometimes less is more. By taking a step back, by taking a rest break, we become more efficient. And just by way of an example that's kind of ancillary to this is I know a lot of professionals pride themselves on how long they can work, the 16-hour days, 6 or 7 days a week, and on a continuing basis, getting by on 3, 4, 5 hours sleep a night. In fact, I remember when my 4 kids were babies, that that was pretty much the norm by necessity, because with 4 kids, at least one of them is getting up at 1:30, they go back to bed, and another one's getting up at 2, and on and on. So, I mean, sometimes it's unavoidable, but when we're going through that time period or that work period, we're actually counterproductive. And even though it may be a badge of honor in a lot of professions, how efficient are you by doing that? Sometimes a rest break is more. In fact, some of the studies show that if you've been working and getting less than 7 hours of sleep for several days, after about 17, 18 hours, you're effectively drunk. The mind works in a way that you're effectively legally drunk by the reaction time of your mind. And it's compounded if you do that over weeks or months or years. And even though we can sometimes do it for shorter periods of time, if the end is in sight, to continue that for too long has very deleterious effects.
Yeah.
So I think we have another poll now, don't we, that we want to try to follow up on? So why don't we post the other poll?
Yeah, so we were talking a little bit about mindfulness there, but we want to talk about stressors next. We're going to be talking about stressors, motivation, mindfulness. This is our little section on stressors. So I'm going to launch a poll right now, everybody. And what I would like y'all to do is answer this question, which is just, where do your stressors come from? We have a lot of options here, and you can click multiple options if you'd like. So feel free to click spiritual, personal beliefs and values, and also physical body and health, whatever works for you all. So I'm just going to leave this poll up here for about 30 seconds or so, and then I'll share the results with you, Brendan. I know you can't see these polls, so I'll have to.
Well, actually, this one is showing up on the screen, so I am seeing this one.
Great. Okay, wonderful.
You worked your magic.
Wonderful. I didn't do anything. Okay, let's see. Physical body. Oh, I was going to say physical body health might win there, but now it looks like we're tied a little bit. And I was going to say, it looks like we're maybe at a standstill. Nope. Got a couple more people still voting. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and end the poll. So I will share our results, and oops, sorry, I did not share the results. Sharing the results now, and what do you think of the response here?
It's very interesting. I'm not surprised that physical is the #1 stressor, because that's of these 6, that's usually the one that is the most recognizable. I know that my ankle hurts. I know that my back hurts. I know that I have a headache. I know that my body type is not what I want, and I'm stressed out about that. And so that's a very common result. What I do find interesting is that both the environmental and spiritual results are relatively low, with 8% each. And environmental includes things like, what's the ambient temperature in your office space, your working space? What's the weather like outside? Are you a warm weather person? Are you a cold weather person? If you're a warm weather person, do you currently reside in Arizona or in Chicago trying to get something done? So and it also goes to things like technology. Does my computer program work? Is my internet down? And then on the spiritual side, spiritual is not meant to be anything like religious, but it's an identification of what are my core values. And I think both of those, the environmental and spiritual, are often a higher level of stressors that we don't always recognize. And of course, when we're looking at things like the physical and the social interactions and the emotional interactions, we think that we can adjust pretty well, but we're also ignoring the other ones. In any situation we have, all 6 of these stressors are working simultaneously. It's not like the only stressor I have is in the physical range or is in the emotional range or the environmental. They're all different. Just looking here at this, for example, we've got 6 options. If you add up the results of all 6 of them, they equal 100%. When we're doing something in our daily lives, all of these 6 emotions are someplace on that scale from 0% to 100%, but in a combination, they equal 100%. And it's recognizing that there is a difference. And how do I shift a negative energy approach to something positive? For example, environmental, putting on a sweater, lowering the thermostat, getting a new computer. What is it that I can do to shift into something that's easier for me to handle? For physical, the physical stressors, maybe it's taking a 10-minute walk, a 15-minute walk 2 or 3 times a day, even if it's walking around your office. What can I do to both recognize the environment, physical aspect of what I'm dealing with as a stressor, and how do I relieve it, even on a short-term basis? Mental ability to focus without being distracted, going to a breathing technique. So we can incorporate these different things, but it's also important to both recognize the types of stressors, recognize that all 6 stressors are possible and are impacting us at the same time, just to certain levels and degrees. So when I think about what's the degree of each one of those, how do I turn anything that I perceive to be negative into something positive? And once we identify, I go back to another adage that I use a lot with my clients, that common sense comes from common experience. So when I'm approaching the environment right now in work situations or in a social situation, my immediate response of how to respond to that in a common sense type of way is based upon my experience from the past. If you and I approach a problem the same way, it probably means that we've had a common experience someplace along the way. And we use that to try to deal with the problems today. That works up to a point. But if we're not getting a more positive energy field, remember that nothing changes if nothing changes. If something isn't working for us and we recognize that these stressors are either unidentified or may not be working for us in a way, I'm going to have to change something in order for taking a different approach. I think back to when my son came to visit me in Arizona, and he was about 10 years old at the time. And one of his tasks was to set the dinner table. And every day he would set the dinner table with salad forks instead of dinner forks. And I told him, why are you doing it this way? And after a few days, I was getting upset because he wasn't doing it the right way. Of course, my common experience was, and my common sense was, that you've got to use the dinner forks. So I finally was exasperated. I said, why are you doing this way? What is so hard to understand about this? And he looked at me and he said, well, these salad forks fit my hand better. Now, I find it very difficult to argue with that. So I adjusted my common sense to think, what does it matter if I eat my dinner with a salad fork instead of a dinner fork, especially if it's easier for him to eat because it fits his hand better?
Yeah, I really like that story. And it's really cool how you, a lot of what we know and how we go about the world is based on, our experiences in life, and people experience things so differently. So, whatever you might think is right or isn't right, it's completely the opposite for another person, just based on how they grew up in their environment. So I really like that anecdote. But I do want to touch on, since we're talking about stressors and emotional, I was going to say already the word doesn't say emotional hangovers, since we kind of are going that way, I do want to talk about emotional hangovers. If we're able to transition maybe from stressors a little bit more into emotional hangovers and what exactly those are.
And that's a good segue because we've just gotten past the holiday season. And oftentimes that period from Thanksgiving to New Year's is one that's filled with a lot of family connections. There also could be stressors from work environment. For example, a lot of the investment bankers that I've worked with and a lot of the lawyers in my practice area of public finance had year-end deadlines. So we were often buffeted back and forth between the stressors of end-of-year deadlines plus end-of-year holiday situations. And briefly summarized, an emotional hangover is an energetic residue which is left over from an interaction or event. What are the emotions that I'm feeling? What are the emotions that I'm struggling with? And this time of year, I have to work because I want to provide for my family. And if I don't work, I'm not going to get my year-end bonus. My big deal has to close. The big trial is coming up. It's almost tax season for those who are in the accounting professions. And so I've got these deadlines, and yet there may be a sense that I'm neglecting my family. And sometimes those are pressures from family. Sometimes, it's the old Aunt Merle, Uncle Harold, or somebody who you just don't get along with and always pushes your buttons when you're at the Thanksgiving dinner or the Christmas dinner or the Hanukkah season, whatever your family gatherings are. And even if there's no big blowups on an interior level, we sense what's going on and our body holds the stress. So without having a relief, that hangover resides for a long period of time. And stress can be positive or negative. We can look at these family gatherings as really energizing. And because they're energizing, we often don't think that there's a hangover. But then when we get to January 13th, we think, boy, I really miss so-and-so who wasn't at the family gathering. And that's part of this emotional hangover. There's a feeling of loss or a feeling of something not gained or a feeling that I really like that, but it's no longer here. And I don't know if I'm going to get that back again. So if we recognize the energy, we need to find a way to release the energy. In dealing with the emotional hangover is both recognizing that there's nothing wrong with me if I have these emotions, positive or negative. It's what do I do about them? And this time of year, for example, it's really difficult because here in the Midwest, it's cold outside. There's a lot more darkness. We're past the winter solstice now, so we are getting a little bit more light each day, but it's still pretty dark for most of the day. And we have gray skies, cold temperatures, snowy conditions. These can foster resentments. They can trigger an emotional hangover. They can bring to mind some of the residue that we had, the longing for being back with our families from the holidays or something.
Yeah.
All the same stressors we talked about before, the 6 stressors in different components and the way they fit together. So it's, again, recognizing that they're natural, that I can work through them. And one way that I work with my clients to work through them is to savor the moment. And I'm guilty of this too, and so are many of the folks that I work with, that I'm guilty of what's next. When I achieve my goal, it's immediately what's next. And I don't savor the moment. And I think one of the ways to recognize and to deal with the emotional hangovers is to say, yeah, I'm feeling a little bit of longing for what happened over the holiday season, but I'm going to savor the memories from that. And I'm going to savor the fact that I'm here and now, that I can plan for something in the future, but I don't have to jump to that right now. The idea of what's next is fine from a planning standpoint. However, we need to savor the emotion, the accomplishment, that what I accomplished over the holidays, what I accomplished in my profession, what I accomplished with my family, how I interact. Each of those moments is something to savor and something from which I can learn and use to feel better about myself, a more positive outlook for myself before I necessarily jump into the next goal. Where do you feel it in your body? Is it, do you feel it in your mind? Do you feel it in your stomach? Because most of the times these have physical manifestations. We have a visceral response to the stressor. Recognize that, and then be able to move forward with it through some mindfulness techniques and practices.
Yeah. And I think it's great to know what an emotional hangover is and how we are able to recognize and savor these moments and be thoughtful and acknowledge and validate what you feel and where you feel it. But once you notice that you're kind of having an emotional hangover and you're able to acknowledge it, how do you move forward from an emotional hangover?
There are ways to approach this both long-term and short-term.
Okay.
And we often hurry to try to get through this. And I think it's part of our human nature that we want to put aside any bad feelings. We want to feel good.
Move on. Yeah.
And move on. I should be over this right now, or I'm anticipating the next big thing in a positive way. Long term, to think about, well, what's another way to look at that? The way I'm feeling right now, what's another way to look at that? Similar to my son with the dinner forks. I didn't think about looking at it from his perspective that the dinner forks may have a different meaning to him because they're easier to fit his hand. Also asking, what are my motives? What am I trying to achieve? I work with my clients a lot to say, what are your motives and what are you afraid of? Because in working through this process, I help to identify what the core values are. And are the core values aligned with the practical applications of what we struggle with or where we are at this point in time? And usually fears are related to that. The next question is, once I can identify what are my motives here, and not judging whether they're good or bad, but just saying, what am I really trying to accomplish here? What are the hidden motives? What are the very noticeable motives, the surface motives? But when I get deep down, what are my core values and what are my motives and how do they align? And then the fears that come up is, what am I afraid of? Because that has two little branches that come down from that. Often I'm afraid of losing something that I have, or I'm afraid I'm not going to get something that I want. Either one of those choices can impact the long-term way of dealing with the emotional hangover. Can I put aside those fears to better understand my motives, and how do I proceed? And in the short term, in order to achieve those goals, to recognize them, it involves things like nutrition and hydration, the breathing exercises we talked about before, movement, a simple movement of a 5 or a 10-minute walk at a time. And by the way, that goes hand in hand with nutrition and hydration, because if you're drinking a lot of water, you're probably going to be desirous of walking around the room a couple of times a day if you drink a couple of glasses of water at a time. So they work hand in hand in that. The other is, for short-term recognition of this, is eco-mindfulness, connecting with nature. And even if you're unable to go out for a walk in the park or walk around the beach, there's been a lot of studies that show that we can connect with nature just by standing at the window and looking outdoors. We can find a tree outside of our carpet window or a lawn or something, and that can start the process in our minds to start that process of eco-mindfulness. And finally, it's sensual stimulation on a short term. What can I do to engage each one of my 5 senses now? Now, the indicators of both the long-term and short-term effects of this include things that are very typical for athletes, as one example of indications of overtraining. And that is that we see wide ranges and swings in things like sleep, our eating habits, mood swings, and heart rate. I have an exercise with my clients where I have them take their resting heart rate for several days to see what their resting heart rate is when they first get up in the morning. And then over a period of time, as they work through some of the techniques, they may find that their resting heart rate gets lower to a certain point and it'll plateau. When stressors start coming about, either the stressors we talked about before or emotional hangover type stressors, that resting heart rate will increase. And even an increase of 2 or 3 beats per minute is an indication that your body's telling you there's a stressor here that we need to identify.
Yeah.
The mood swings can be because everybody processes their stress and their emotions differently. It could be that you're sleeping all the time or you have insomnia. You're eating the seafood diet where you eat everything you see, or you're not eating it at all. You're getting very giddy or you're getting very surly. Mood swings that are different from the way that you were normally processing before you identify what's happening. Looking at things from a long-term perspective, a short-term perspective, and what are the markers that I can look at right now to see where we are ways to handle these, the emotional hangover. So I know that we're getting close to time. We're getting near the end of our time. So I'd like to learn what techniques people will try out from this last section if they have anything in mind. So Nicole, could you punch up our last audience poll for participation?
Yeah, sure, guys. We have a final poll here. We just wanted to see if anyone thinks they will maybe try out any of this, breathing or meditation or going out for a walk around the block, exercise, maybe practicing that mindfulness, gratefulness. So go ahead and answer the poll. You can check 3, 2, 1 if you think you'll practice some of these. Totally up to you, but these are all, Brendan, this is his profession. He does this for a living. And so, these are some real things that you can do that are so simple that can really improve your life. It's pretty amazing. I tried out the sit by my window the other day and look at a tree for a little bit, and I will say I did love that. It definitely worked for me, that practicing gratefulness and eco mindfulness.
Eco mindfulness.
Eco mindfulness, wonderful. So we have most everyone participated there, and it's already been a minute since I've had it up somehow. So I'll go ahead and end that poll and share it with you. And for the last time, I'm going to go ahead and ask you, what do you think of these results?
I think these are very typical to what I've seen, because the most common answer was breathing. And we've seen how easy it is to do that, to just sit in your chair, focus on your breath, the box breathing technique, 4 in, hold, 4 out, hold. So it can be done anywhere. Interesting exercise is the second, because I think as people, we like to move. And the idea of even moving around the condo or the apartment or the park is a way to get motivated. And typically the beginning part of the year, exercise is a big part of our New Year's resolutions.
Yeah. So
I do think those two are very typical. Meditation came in third. And, I think of meditation. Well, at one time I thought I'd have to grow a long white beard and sit on the top of a mountain for 10 hours a day, eating nuts or something else like that.
Yeah.
But I found that meditation can be combined with things like the breathing techniques and even saying a poem while I'm breathing and closing my eyes. And meditation can be done in 3 or 4 minutes. Meditation can be done by visualization techniques, thinking about something in my mind. And one technique that I use for meditation is if I usually cut pieces of ribbon, and I often cut pieces of ribbon in the color green, and I hold them in my fingers, and I think back to a pleasant time in my life. Now, sometimes the thought is when I was 8 years old, running on a playground and just enjoying a lot of fun with my friends. Other times it was a major accomplishment, being made partner in my firm, the joy that I experienced about that, the needs for success. But I'm thinking of something that's positive, that has an emotional meaning to me. And as I close my eyes and think about that for about 15 or 20 seconds, I focus both on the sensation of holding the ribbon and my mindset. Later on, as a meditative technique, I can reach for that ribbon, hold it, and bring back to my mind the thought that I had when I was doing the exercise to begin with. Now, interestingly, I've worked with lawyers who have done this kind of an exercise before walking into court for trial, that they breathe a couple of times, the box breathing segments, while they reach for their ribbon to calm themselves down before going into the courtroom. The fourth one, and the least of the amounts here, was 54%, was gratitude, practicing gratitude. And I think that's one that's often underrated by many of us. We don't realize what gratitude really has meaning for us and significance in our lives. And there's a phrase in psychology and also in physical therapy, so combining both the body and the mind in this, called reciprocal inhibitions. And reciprocal inhibitions means that we can't hold two contrary thoughts in our mind at the same time. So if I'm angry, or I'm resentful, and I think about gratitude, something that I'm grateful for, I can't maintain both of those at the same time. So my resentment, my anger will diminish if I think about some things to be grateful for. Yeah. And they can be worked into just thinking a list of two things that I'm grateful for on a list that I can also incorporate while I'm breathing, while I'm meditating, or while I'm exercising. It also distinguishes some of the things that are important to me, and has physical ramifications as well as psychological ramifications.
Yeah, and to be fair, I don't think we talked about mindfulness all too much. So that doesn't shock me too much that it came in fourth, because I think we really focused on, the emotional hangover and mindfulness, and it was such a small part there. So, all in all, we can get all these things done if we just take a moment, step back, do a little meditation, a little breathing. I mean, they really all go together, getting up and walking around, but also sitting down and really focusing our minds. They're all achievable, super achievable if we just take the time to think about it. But having said this, we are getting very close to 12, but we did have some folks submit some questions ahead of time while they registered for this event. So I do really want to try to answer some of those if we can do maybe like a speed round here. And anyone here that's on the webinar, if you do have a question and want to use that raise hand function, this is your chance to also maybe ask your question if you weren't one of those folks that did pre-submit a question. So do feel free to use that function if you'd like. If not, no problem. We do have some questions to run through ourselves. So I'm going to start out with this first one really quickly here, Brendan. And that question was asked by an audience member ahead of time. And that question is, how do I motivate myself when the last thing I want to do is go outside and work out? I love this question.
I'm sitting here looking out over the park, and there's snow on the ground. There are no leaves on the trees, and I can see the waves coming up on Lake Michigan on the shore, and it looks really cold out there. I can't see the sun. The sky is completely overcast. So I share the motivation. When we end this webinar, I don't feel motivated to go out and take a walk right now in the circumstances. So yes, it can be difficult to get motivated at this time. But that's why it's really important to understand why you want to do what you want to do. What is it that's blocking me from doing what I want to do? Remember how important it is to you. What is the why? Finding the why to do this. Viktor Frankl wrote Man's Search for Meaning. He was a Holocaust survivor in the concentration camps. And as part of his philosophy, he recounted something from Nietzsche that said, if man has a why, we can endure almost anyhow. So we can find out how to do something if we understand the why. So from a motivational standpoint, it goes back to a point that we made early in our time today, that finding a resolution or finding something that is not just the same old, that's not just the popular flavor of the month, but something that's meaningful. And if I recognize that, the motivation there. Every goal we have comes at a price. Am I willing to pay the price? So when I'm setting the goal, when I'm setting the motivation, what can I do to achieve that goal? What am I willing to pay? For specifics, getting in outdoors in winter, we can do the following things. It's like the old question, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. So to start with, you can stand out, even inside the window, look out the window at the outdoors. You can connect with the sunshine or lack of sunshine in nature. Put on the clothes that you're going to wear if you want to go outside or to accomplish your goal. Tell yourself that you're going to try it for 5 minutes or 10 minutes, a manageable amount of time, and one that will help you overcome the stopping wish. Because the stopping wish comes at one point even here. But if I tell myself I'm going to go out for 5 minutes and I'm going to reassess at the end of 5 minutes how I feel and what I'm willing to do, that's a manageable amount of time for me to think, okay, I feel much better, I'm going to continue, or I've had enough, it's time to go back. But you've had the opportunity. You can align your values with the intentions and with the actions.
Great. Okay, so it is 11:56. We have 4 more minutes, and I just really quickly want to get this second question asked, and then I think we can wrap up. So we just talked about how the heck do you motivate yourself to go outside or work out when that's the last thing you want to do. Speaking more to some resolutions here, what are some ways that you've been able to make these resolutions stick?
I revisit that question in some form or another every year around January, especially around January 13th, because it's been long enough after the first of the year, to need to assess whether I'm still on track and whether I'm beating myself up or congratulating myself for not maintaining or for maintaining so far. I found a couple of things that help me make my resolutions stick and also help me to achieve a goal. The first is to, again, come back to the point of choosing something that's meaningful to me and understanding why that's meaningful to me. The second thing is to write them down on a piece of paper or put them someplace where I can see them. Even a post-it note on the mirror in the morning, so that when I'm getting up and washing my face or shaving or something, I can see that as a reminder. The third is to share these approaches, share these resolutions with somebody. It brings accountability. It also is somebody who can bounce ideas off of that. I'm just not feeling it today. So, but if I know there's somebody that I trust will give me honest feedback or supportive, or to say, yeah, you probably shouldn't do that today because of all the things that are going on in your life. And then the last thing is to review periodically and adjust when necessary. Many of my clients are goal-oriented, and they feel the need to continuously achieve in a progressive way to the goal. We found through exercise programs, the two key elements are rest and recovery. So that even the elite athletes, when they're achieving a goal, they will stress their body through practice sessions, whether it's hitting a baseball or running for 10 miles. And then the next day or two, they step back. They reduce it and allow their body to recover. And that allows for recuperation, regeneration of the body. So by reviewing the goals periodically, it may be that the goal was not aggressive enough or it was too aggressive. If it's not aggressive enough, maybe I need to step up and have a couple of more of those intermediate steps to achieve the goal. Or if life got lifey and I can't reach my goal, adjust in a downward way in a manner that I don't feel like I'm failing. That there's a reason for my adjustment. It could be physical. It could be any of those 6 stressors: spiritual, emotional, mental, physical, social, or environmental. Something is impacting me that's going to cause me to achieve the goal and still reach the goal, but maybe on a different timeline, and not think negatively of myself.
I love that. Life does get lifey. So that's probably my favorite sentence that you shared today. So as you know, life is lifey, and it is 12 o'clock, and that is our time for today, actually. So thank you for your great questions, folks, that you submitted ahead of time. We really appreciate those. And we hope that the knowledge that you gained today helps ease your mind a little bit, and that you feel a little bit better equipped to take on 2022 in this very cold winter that we're experiencing so far. So thank you, Brendan, for your knowledge and for sharing all of your expertise with us and these practices. I really, really appreciate it. I'll turn it over to you to finish us off.
Thank you, Nicole. I appreciate the opportunity to be of service today. And if you have additional questions, you or the audience have additional questions on anything we cover today, you can schedule a complimentary 30-minute session with me through my website, coachbrendan.com, which is on the screen by my name, or you can email me at coach@coachbrendan.com. It's really been a privilege. You've raised a lot of issues in my mind that I need to visit frequently. because I sometimes forget. So you've triggered with these questions today in the seminar, some things that I need refreshers on as well. I'm grateful for the opportunity and really hope all of you have a wonderful day and a good new year.
Thank you.